Hello. Hi. How are you? Coach Aaron Saft, the Running is Life podcast. And apologies ahead of time. My voice is a bit froggy. We had our first indoor track meet, and I was cheering. So I'm a little bit froggy on my voice, so I apologize for that. We had a good first meet. Really, really nice to see the kids in action. It's tough because we're coming right off the Christmas break. Some kids didn't train. Some kids did, and you could tell the difference. And that was, that was something. It was really cool to watch my daughter race. She didn't have a seed time in the mile. We had her in the mile. They said you could make up one, but I've been kind of, bumped to slower heats and such in the past, and just didn't feel comfortable with doing that. So I let her race. She was in the unseeded heat, so not the fast heat, but she took it out, led from the gun, ran a really good season opener in the mile, 5:37. And then her teammate Amron, a senior, she did fantastic. She also led from the gun in the seeded section, the fast section, and ran 5:29. So very good season openers for the two of them. Some of these other teams have been racing already, but happy to see those two. They went 1-2, so my daughter got second place, coming from the unseeded section. So pretty stoked about that for her. So pretty cool. So things are going the right direction. It's exhausting, so exhausting. I didn't get home till about 11 o'clock last night. So long meet, but beautiful facility at the Tryon Equestrian Center. Brand new 200-meter bank track. Going to be a great facility. Such a great thing to have so close to us. Just feel really fortunate to have that for the kids. Each week we'll be there racing. So excited for that. Other than that, we'll talk a little bit more at the end and catch up a little bit more at the end of things that are going on and all that good stuff. But want to kind of get into the meat of the episode here. Solo episode. I'm going to kind of talk about a topic that resurfaces a lot, not only in my own life, but in my athletes as well. Something that we work together through. And I think we all could kind of ponder on some of these thoughts and make some legitimate actions that might make a better difference, not only in our running, but in our lives. This podcast, my coaching is called Running is Life. And this is a crossover. So we're going to talk about giving yourself grace. There's some various topics here that kind of, touch on the frills of giving yourself grace. And there's some definite, substance to some of these, that we're going to talk about here. But, I really think it's a pertinent topic because a lot of times we don't give ourselves that grace. We're very hard on ourselves. We don't take a step back and look at the big picture sometimes. And I'm guilty of that myself, but this Misogi that I just completed, the calendar challenge in December, has taught me a lot, and some of that's going to come into play here when we talk about giving yourself grace. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about this. I've got about maybe 10 bullet points that we're going to run through here, and we could dive deeper and deeper into some of these at some point. Love to hear your take. Your thoughts and how you perceive some of these things as well. So, please reach out. I'm really interested to hear from you guys as to what you think on some of these things and how you use them in your own life. So don't hesitate to do so. Thank you. So the first bullet point, understanding priorities and allowing them to remain priorities. So before we get into a training cycle, it's good to remind ourselves what are our priorities. If I look at my own life, my priorities lie in my family, in my work, my coaching, and then tertiary, and there may be things before that. It would then be my running, right? So I have many priorities ahead, and those specific priorities that I mentioned, family, that includes friends. Work, that includes coaching my athletes, both adult and youth. So, there's subcategories of each of those. And then, then like running comes behind that. And a lot of times I have to remind myself that, like, that I have to look at those other things and what are those other needs? What did they require of my time? Where do I have to have the time to go run, right? Like, based on my priorities, right? I have to make sure that I take care of my family. Their needs are met, right? And that can include, driving my daughter somewhere. That can include doing laundry, house chores, helping my wife, cooking a meal. All of those things are placed into that category. I have to place those first. So what are those needs? Then I look at my work needs. What do I have to accomplish on a given day? And then, beyond that, what time do I have left for what I want to accomplish? And sometimes when I'm writing my schedule, I have to think about those things ahead of time, right? So I'll usually pull up my calendar. I use a Google Calendar, and I look at the week ahead and see what it is, and then I can kind of build my schedule around available time. Knowing that like a longer run, perhaps like a medium long run during the week, is better saved for a day where I have less phone calls with my adult athletes, not as much maybe workload where I'm not trying to record the podcast and do schedules for my adult athletes and have track practice. So, taking those things into consideration, what are the best days for me to fit in what I want to fit in? And so, allowing those priorities to remain priorities throughout and not losing sight of that. That's the other piece, because we get so caught up in the training and wanting to get the training in that sometimes we sacrifice those other priorities. And, sometimes we can give ourselves that grace to say, yeah, today I just needed this run, right? It may be a long run on the weekend where it's like, yeah, I've got all these household chores to do, but today the priority is getting this long run in. I really want to go out and get this long run in. And then afterwards, I'll work on those chores. So maybe it's, kind of allowing yourself that grace to go get in that run because you've had a really rough week. So we can give ourselves grace in that regard from time to time. But again, we want to make sure that we prioritize and get those things done so that we don't feel stressed about having to go for a run. And that's a whole nother topic about not being stressed by what's on the schedule, not feeling guilty for going out and doing what you are scheduled to do. So we'll get into that bullet point here in a little bit, but allowing yourself that grace for priorities, because sometimes the priorities shift a little bit and the running can take the priority. It just may take a little bit of finagling to maneuver things around and say, hey, could I get that, that chore done either later today or on another day? So thinking about that ahead of time will help you do so. With that said, understanding a day off or 3 isn't the worst thing in the world. This is something that's very difficult for all of us. We may have a huge work project that is just requiring us to work super long hours, and we're just exhausted from, having to do this workload. And with that said, the running is just too hard to fit in. Now, you may not be able to fit in a run, and that's okay. And that's okay to, to give yourself that grace, because again, you're prioritizing what has to be done. It's not the worst thing in the world to take a day off. After this past weekend, this is one example. I completed the Misoji last week, my personal challenge, the calendar challenge. I completed that last Wednesday. And with that, I took 2 days off, and we had a group run for my adult athletes on Saturday. And I went out for a nice, easy run with some of my athletes. Really enjoyed it. Felt pretty good, actually. Legs weren't 100%, but I didn't expect them to be after, having already done 90 miles that week, in 3 days, no less. So, I was like, that was okay. Not quite recovered, to be expected. But Sunday, I wanted to get in a big effort, ahead of the Fierce Dragon, which is just over a week away. And with that, I just had a loop in my head, and I didn't know how long it was. I didn't know how much vertical gain it was. I really didn't care, to be honest. I just wanted to go out there and do it. Just be out in the woods and enjoy a run. Like, not have that stress of, a specific mileage, a specific elevation goal, a specific time goal. There was none of that because I had just spent an entire month consumed by completing a certain amount of mileage per day and trying to get it done and fit it into my schedule of an already busy life, especially through the holidays. So, the stress of that personal challenge, that calendar challenge, it grew, obviously, as the challenge, came to its culmination with having so many miles in one given day and having to spend so much time on feet. It was nice to just go out and not care if I ran, if I walked, if I stopped. It was just a day of enjoyment. Now, I didn't feel great. I'm going to be, forthcoming here. I did not feel great on that run. My legs didn't really have much pep or pop to them. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every aspect of that run. And while it was difficult to not get caught up because I started seeing the numbers on my watch, how much elevation I was getting, and et cetera, and how much time was accumulating. Again, I didn't want to do too much because I was under 2 weeks to race day. But I really legitimately enjoyed that run. But that said, I also recognize my body didn't have the recovery that it needed. I ended up getting like 115 miles in last week, which is obviously still a lot, so that's 3 weeks in a row of over 100 miles. Which, was very physically demanding, mentally demanding. So I needed a little bit of time off. I recognized that. And also I had to recognize that I had to get a lot of work done in order to have the race, because the race is next Friday. My daughter's birthday is next week, and we're celebrating with a trip next weekend. After Fierce Dragon. So I had all of these things coming up. So I recognized that my workload was going to be exponentially larger to get ahead and get prepared for all that time I'd need off from, doing my typical job. So I prioritized the work. I did not prioritize the running. I allowed myself to take 3 days off. Now, that third day was yesterday, and I was on the fence of going for a run. But again, looking at what had to be done, having our first meet last night, I saw that I had some work that I needed to get done, some things that needed to be done around the house. And I was like, hey, let's just give myself another day. It's not the worst thing in the world. Probably better for my body, and get these things done so I'm not so stressed. So that's what I did. I focused on the other things. I prioritized the other things. I gave myself another day, and lo and behold, today I felt like my legs had more pop to them than they have in so long. Obviously, being tired and more tired from the challenge, the calendar challenge. It was taxing. So, to feel refreshed, to be able to just run. I ran with my wife for the first 3 miles. Kind of took me a little bit of time to kind of pass the lethargy of the rust of taking 3 days off. But, once I got into it, legs just felt like they were turning over. I could lift my knees. It's just like, I kind of felt like by the end of the calendar challenge, I was just shuffling. And, I was tripping because my feet weren't lifting. Today, I just felt like I felt refreshed. That's what I'll say, is I felt refreshed. I felt much better. So, message here is that a few days off aren't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you have other things that need to be accomplished. We can take a few days off, get right back into training, and it's almost as if we missed nothing. Sometimes we come back so much, more refreshed. It's actually much better for us, just as I did. So, don't be afraid of that time off. Taking those few days off, especially if it's going to reduce your stress load, because we have to recognize stress and recognize where that stress is coming from. This is something that I worked on with my sports mental performance coach, Marissa. And, we recognized, and that's kind of why I took a step away from the podcast for a while. I just had too much stress in my life. I had too much. We always talk about, well, my plate is overflowing. I've got too much going on. And I felt like I had multiple plates and they were all overflowing. And that's not a great feeling because of everything else that was going on. I kind of feel that way about track right now. Is I'm a little bit overwhelmed by all of the other administrative things that have to take place, let alone the amount of coaching that takes place because of how many different distances there are. So, I want to serve these kids the best I can and give them each kind of, not individualized programming, but at least event-specific programming so that, we can hopefully make gains for each of them. But that's stressful, and I'm recognizing that stress is really affecting me and it's affecting my enjoyment, because it's hard to give that attention to the kids and to be there and to, be specific about block starts or relay exchanges. The other day I finally got to just coach, and it felt so good to just be working with the kids one-on-one and showing them, demonstrating, talking about technique. And that really felt good to me. That's what I miss. There's just so much other ancillary things that schools require these days that just take away from my enjoyment of the coaching aspect of it. But that's what's causing me stress. So, the other piece of this, and this is kind of another bullet point that I will get to and talk about, is having someone to talk about these things with. My wife can see it, and we talk about it, and that helps me a lot. And we're going to talk a little bit more about having others to talk about, but that's a big piece of this, is being able to talk to others about that stress. It's a conversation I certainly need to have with the administration. I've asked for help, a bajillion times, and it's just so hard to find other coaches that are willing to come out and do this for basically, pennies. It's not the reason that we do this, obviously, is, being a middle school or high school coach, there's not money involved. It's really just the pure love of working with the kids, of kind of giving back to the sport. But again, we have to recognize stress and where it's coming from. And if this is where I'll make the connection here to taking days off. If your stress is getting to the level where, you're really just ticking a box to get the run in, and it's more stressful to try to get that in because you just have too much of a workload, that day off probably is necessary in order for you to be able to get the work done so that you don't have that stress in your life. If that is going to make the difference, take that day off. And just do what you need to do, get it done. You'll feel so much better, and your run will be exponentially better because that weight is lifted off your shoulders. So taking that day because you are stressed out, that's totally okay. Cortisol is cortisol. I had this conversation with my athletes the other day. They asked me what cortisol is. And it's a release of hormone that is your stress hormone. And running creates more cortisol in our body. Running is a stressful event. And so we have to remember that we're elevating our cortisol levels. And if we're already stressed out by our work life, our family life, and we're adding cortisol to all of that stress by running, it can be too much. It can be too much on the body, and we create too much fatigue, and that's when you feel super worn down. You're probably going to get sick, okay, because your body is just worn down. Immune system's going to be worn down. So, think about that and be okay. Give yourself that grace to allow yourself to take that day off, okay? Right on. All right, that's bullet point 2. Bullet point 3, knowing what you are committing to ahead of time and understanding what comes with that, okay? So, when we start a training cycle, and this is the time where we have to kind of anticipate what will the next few months look like. So when we look at the calendar ahead, if we know that we're going to have a maximum volume phase in X month or X months, that we're going to have very high training volume in order to accomplish our goal of racing, then we have to also look at our schedule and say, does that work with that time period? What does my work schedule look like? Is that going to be a super busy time at work? What does my family schedule look like? Do the kids have, their t-ball games, whatever it may be? Is that going to be really difficult to get in my training based on what's going on in my life, both family and work? Again, going back to the priorities, looking at your priorities and saying, well, what do those priorities entail in my schedule? Knowing that ahead of time and looking at what potential training may look like at that time, do they coincide? Is it feasible for you to do so? and that's something that I think we oftentimes miss is, that connection between, maybe this isn't the best time to put a goal race in. I just don't have the legitimate amount of time to put in the training to meet what I need to do. With that, okay, so with bullet point 3, I'm going to blend in now bullet point 4. While at the same time, we have to understand things change over the course of months, right? So, at the beginning, you may not have had something, but all of a sudden at work, your boss turns in this huge assignment, right? And that can change everything. Oh my gosh, the time I thought I was going to have has now been greatly reduced. Okay. So if your time is greatly reduced and, we're committed to this training plan, how can we move forward? How can we get this done? Right. And so the next few bullet points will kind of all blend into these 2 bullet points that we're talking about. And the next bullet point would be knowing there are obstacles that you are not prepared for, but are willing to find workarounds, right? So, with that said, okay, so now your work schedule may have changed or your family obligations may have changed. So what can change in your daily schedule in order for you to make this work? Is it that you wake up earlier and get it done earlier? Is it that you have to do it when the kids go to bed? Are you breaking up your runs? You have to be creative sometimes in your workarounds in order to try to accomplish this. Is it better to switch your long run to a different day, right? So all different ways that you can accomplish your goal without sacrificing what you had planned. Okay, those 3 are kind of a grouping. But with that said, there's a 4th bullet point that I want to touch on with that, and that is understanding goals may not be feasible due to the inability to train, due to injury or reduced training time. Okay, so with that said, maybe there isn't a workaround. You've kind of scratched your head here. You've really thought upon your schedule. There's just no time to fit in what you really wanted to do. So what do you do at that point when you're like, I really can't train for this one, the way I had hoped? Well, you can change your goal. Right. I remember when I was training for Hellbender, I had all these aspirations of trying to break 24 hours. I really wanted one of Jonathan Eibach's North Carolina wood cutouts that he makes for the sub 24 hour finishers at Hellbender. I was really, ever since I had him come up with those and make those, I wanted, to try to achieve that. And, my life at the time was such that it wasn't feasible. I couldn't put in the amount of training that it required for me to do so. And while frustrating, while I was frustrated by the fact that I couldn't put in the training, I had to take that step back. Again, here we are talking about taking a step back and looking at the big picture. What did I value more? Did I value more getting that sub 24 hour award, or did I value more finishing the Hellbender 100? Now, unfortunately, the Hellbender 100 didn't work out. I got sick and had to pull out. But that said, I still gave it a go because I prioritized, again, going back to priorities, I prioritized the fact that I wanted to finish that race more than earn this 24 hour. So I changed the goal. I gave myself the grace to say, listen, I don't have the capabilities. I don't have the time in my life to do the training that I really thought I would initially have. When I looked at my schedule, I didn't foresee some of the things that came up. And when those things came up, I realized that the feasibility of training wasn't there. I then had to change my goal and say, okay, reality is, I'm not going to be able to go after that. Another example would be for the Bigfoot 200. And the Bigfoot 200 training was going great. I had the time, I had the energy. I didn't have any stresses that were requiring me to limit my training. So everything was going just, great. I was so happy with how things were going. And then I got COVID. It put me down for 2 weeks. I couldn't run for 2 weeks just due to fatigue levels from COVID. that like put a squash on my training. I had 4 weeks to Bigfoot. You've heard this story before. So, my goal was to finish top 3 at Bigfoot. But, with those 2 weeks off and not knowing how training would resume and how training would go, I said, okay, the reality of me placing in top 3, may have just kind of flown the coop. But can I still finish 200 miles? Would I still be able to do 200 miles? And, I got a few runs in. I got a good long run in. And, I said, hey, the reality is I probably still can finish this thing. I can probably still do this and have a good time. Not put myself at any risk of injury due to my lack of training or the state of my body. And I went for it. And I still had a great time. I still finished I was 11th. So, not a bad finish at all. I had a great time, great experience. But, coming to grips with the reality that my goal was not realistic. That's a hard thing to do. And to kind of revise those goals and be okay with those goals. That's the other big piece of this. If you're not okay with that goal, you have to consider whether you really want to do that race. Because, if just finishing is not what you wanted, if that's not okay, if you're going to be super frustrated by that, perhaps the best thing to do is just to pull out from the race altogether. That's a really hard decision. But again, communicating with others and talking with them about that can really lend you, that extra advice, that extra thinking process that you need, right? Because on your own, sometimes we don't make the best decisions. And that's why it's great to have a coach or someone with a lot of experience that can, from the outside look in and being like, hey, you're being an idiot. Let's not do that, right? That's who you need. You need the person that's not a yes man. You need the person that's that's a stupid idea. They're going to be honest with you and tell you the reality. And that's hard for me to do as a coach because I know you've worked hard for, that goal. But, I also want to be real with you and say, hey, that's not the best idea. I don't think that will work out. And sometimes I have this conversation. I had a conversation yesterday. We're talking about 2026 and, race schedules. And I just said, hey, that race really just does not fit in with what you're trying to do. If your goals are really to accomplish A and B, then that race does not help you accomplish that goal. It's just going to get in your way. So, seeing these things and understanding these things, that's huge. So, recognizing that your goals may not be feasible, that's a huge step. But the next step is the even bigger one. What do you do about it? So you have options, but communicate and try to figure out what is the best option for you. Again, we're thinking of the long game, right? We're thinking of the long haul. I want to be running for years to come. I want to do this sport for as long as I can. Just running in general, not necessarily ultra marathon. I just want to be able to go out there and run. I just love doing that. And so for that, I have to recognize when my goals don't align, when those aren't able to accomplish those goals, and be okay with that. That's hard sometimes. All right. The next bullet point kind of ties into what I was just saying, and that's understanding you can't do every race, that you have other obligations. We talk often about FOMO, fear of missing out, and that's a real thing that a lot of us face. I see it all the time. All of a sudden, a race pops up on my athlete's schedule. Oh, I had a free entry, didn't want it to go to waste. Is it really the best idea to throw in this, 50K if you just started training? Probably not. Just because you got a free entry doesn't mean you have to use it. I get it. It's a good opportunity, but is it the right opportunity? So, understanding we can't do every race. That's hard for us sometimes. And, I faced it with Heartbreaker. I wanted to do Heartbreaker this year, but the reality is my daughter's probably going to run at nationals and it's the same weekend. So I had to sacrifice that, for her. And that's fine. Again, she's my priority. Looking at my priorities, if I did that race, my priorities aren't aligning. I'm not putting that race ahead of my daughter. I had to miss her nationals last year because I was with my son at his nationals. She doesn't let me forget that, by the way. And that's hard. That's hard. It's not that my son was the priority. It's, I was the only one that was able to take him out there. We went to Oregon and he ran in the Nike Nationals. My wife couldn't go, but she could take my daughter to Adidas, which was over in Greensboro, close by. So it's hard, these priorities. It really is hard sometimes. And it takes, a working team to sometimes make your priorities a reality. But oftentimes we try to force things. We try to force events that don't need to happen. When we're looking at our goals, again, when you look at your goals, is this going to stand in the way of you being better in reaching your potential goal? Sometimes we do things just because mentally we think they're going to help, but physically they're a drawback. They hurt us. Literally they hurt us. We oftentimes do things because we think mentally we need them. And oftentimes we don't. Again, this is a time where you need to ask somebody, is this a good idea? Because a lot of times people do it and they're like, I just needed to do this. And, was it the right decision? Was my Sunday run the right decision? I think it was, but if I had a coach, maybe they'd say, hey, probably didn't need to do that. And, they're probably right. I'm not saying I'm not guilty of it. I do it too. But, again, having that voice, that second set of eyes is a great thing. And talking to those people prior to pulling the trigger on a race registration is great. Because oftentimes we're not trying to align our goals and give ourselves the best shot at our goals because we get enticed into doing something that we really don't need to do. So before you pull the trigger on some random race, understand, is it going to align with my season? Is it aligning with my goals and what I'm trying to accomplish? All right. Now, this next part has a bit contrary to what I just discussed. And that is, we need to be okay with allowing ourselves to train and race. There's a balance here. Yes, we can set up a race season, right? We can set up races that are going to set us up for success. That's the big message here, is that we can. But we have to be okay with that race season. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we feel guilt that we're missing out on something because we didn't look at our priorities, right? What are our obligations, right? That's going back to the first point I made. So having those conversations with those that are closest to you are vital when you're setting up your season. Talk with your wife, talk with your husband, talk with your significant other, talk with your kids. What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? And what does everybody else's calendar look like? Is it okay for you to go train? What are your long runs going to look like? Tell your family, what are you planning? That was a hard conversation. It was a hard sell, and I'm not sure my wife's still on board with the Rocky Mountain Slam. A lot of travel, a lot of expense. She understands, my mindset, what I want to do here. I think she's getting more and more on board with it. She knows I didn't have the greatest time in the last Grand Slam. I think, and we'll talk a little bit about this in another episode. My mindset's very different for this one, because of the courses that are involved. So anyhow, side note there. But talking through and making sure that they're on board, they're excited by these opportunities, these races, that they're okay with you taking time, to go train, because we feel guilty. And that's the hard part, not feeling guilty about doing all of these things because of the time it requires for us to be away. It's selfish. It is. But sometimes we have to be selfish. That's a really hard statement to make. But that's the truth, is that sometimes we need that for ourselves, for our own personal, physical, and mental health. We need that time. So recognizing that and being okay with that, that's one of the most difficult things for parents, being away from their family, especially when the kids are young. So perhaps when they're really little and you don't want to miss a moment, perhaps that's not the best time for you to have major running goals. That's a difficult moment to step away from because, again, we want to do these things, especially while, we have the capability of doing them. But if it's going to run you so deep in guilt that it's going to, make it hard for you to get out there and train, make it hard for you to go out there and race, that's a really tough moment to kind of decide, is this the right time to do it? I remember when my son was born and I was training for the DuPont Trail Marathon. It was the U.S. Trail Marathon Championships. That was tough. That was a tough time having him. He was just born. I just started the business with Scott in Footer X. My wife was in residency, so Keegan was with me forever. Basically he had daycare for a few hours and then he was with me. When he could hold his neck and I could get him into the baby jogger, we did so much running together. That kid was in the baby jogger. I did so many miles with the baby jogger. And then, when my wife would get home and could take care of Keegan, I'd throw my headlamp on and go out for a run. Or I'd wake up before, Keegan woke up and before my wife had to leave, and I'd go for my run then. I found the workarounds, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is, having the capability to work around your family schedule. They, if they're on board for what you're trying to do, then, that's wonderful, because you don't have that guilt. You have that time to yourself. And you need that. You do. So, making sure that everybody's on board for those races. Okay, that's a huge component to you giving yourself grace to go race, to go train. All right? So have those conversations. Next bullet point. While running races. Okay, so while you're training, while you're racing, and this is a conversation that I'm going to have with my track athletes, because I could see it on the track last night in some of them, is we have to recognize this sport is hard. We are not going to feel good 100% of the time. And on goal race day, you may not feel good, unfortunately. And when I did the calendar challenge, that is what I sought. I sought those moments where I was so darn tired and I was, just worn out, fatigued from all the time on feet. And in those moments, I reminded myself, this is why I'm doing it. To understand this is hard. This is not easy. I am gonna make it through it. I am mentally tough enough to make it through it. Physically, I can keep going. And that's what I wanted to show myself, is that physically I could keep going and mentally I could work through it. I wanted to build my mental strength and show myself that when I am tired, my body can keep moving. I've gotten into complacency, and that's a hard thing to realize. Reading that book, Michael Easter's The Comfort Crisis, made me realize that when I go out there and do ultras, I'm looking for comfort. I don't want to be uncomfortable when I'm doing these things, and that is a missing piece. That is not a recipe for success. And that's what I recognized in the Misoji. That's the biggest thing I took away from the calendar challenge, is that it is hard, and that's okay. Me being uncomfortable is okay. I have to be uncomfortable with being very uncomfortable. We talk about that, but we don't recognize it, and when we get into those moments, we seek comfort, and there is none. There honestly is no comfort at that moment. And that's what we have to recognize, is that being uncomfortable is okay. We are going to be uncomfortable, but that discomfort is going to end the sooner we get to the finish line. So the sooner you get done, the faster that discomfort is going to end. But we have to recognize that discomfort and understand that that discomfort is part of this process. That's the mental piece that I worked on. We oftentimes talk about it, and I've talked about it on the podcast, and saying, what happens when you go to that dark place? What happens when you're in the pain cave? How will you react? If you can understand that thought of what I just stated, that being uncomfortable is okay. It is part of the process, and you can keep moving. Then you will make it through that pain cave. You will make it through that darkness. That's the peace. That's what I worked on through the Misogi. That's what I was missing. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted going into this Rocky Mountain Slam. To understand discomfort and to be okay with it. And we have to put ourselves in those situations. And that's what the Misogi did for me, is it put me in that situation so that I could work on it day in and day out for 31 days. Now, all 31 days didn't challenge me in that way. Of course, in the beginning, it was really simple. But as I hit mile 15, day 16, day 17, it began to be apparent that this was going to be really hard. And that's where I learned the most. I learned the most about me and how to deal with discomfort again. I had lost that. I truly had. So, there's no guarantees at Fierce Dragon. There's never a guarantee when we toe the line that we're going to reach the finish line. 2025 proved that to me. And that's part of this sport as well. And I have to give myself the grace to say, hey, those days weren't the days I had hoped they'd be. But that doesn't define me. Those DNFs do not define me. What defines me is what I do moving forward. How do I react to those situations? How do I react to the next situation? Am I going to be fearful? I'm not going to be fearful. I'm going to be mindful. I'm going to think about, what am I doing? How am I doing it? How can I react to situations? How can I work around them? December 25th taught me so much. That Christmas day where I had food poisoning, I had every workaround that I could think about. I had every reason to stop. But that discomfort, right? That level of discomfort that I experienced was far greater than anything I had experienced in my running career. I think back to, all the days of running. I had never been through so much discomfort in a run or a race, for that matter. I mean, when you have food poisoning, if you've experienced it, there is no comfort and there is no resolve. The only thing you can do is keep moving forward if you're trying to accomplish something. And that's all I could do, is to keep moving forward and keep trying to get something down, both liquid and food, which when you have food poisoning usually doesn't stay down. So it was a mini ultra in and of itself. Now, again, I don't recommend running through food poisoning. I do not recommend it. I was committed at day 25 to finishing that calendar challenge. Stupidly, I was, but thank God I had my wife around me. And my wife is a licensed physician. So being a doctor and having her monitor me, I felt she would never put me in danger. I wasn't far from home. She kept checking on me. So I had safety around me. I had the safety. Now, things could have went south. Things could have went bad, and I'm glad they didn't. But again, these lessons that I've taken away, I've put myself in these positions to improve upon myself, to understand what is the body and mind capable of. I had to have that reminder. I had lost that. And maybe you haven't challenged yourself in that way. Maybe you're looking at a new distance and saying, I want to challenge myself like that. Okay? When those moments come, when the dark moments come, when you're deep in the pain cave, you have to tell yourself, this is okay. This discomfort is part of the process. Recognizing that and being able to move forward from it is a major milestone. It's necessary. And that's what I need to talk to the kids about, because I saw when they raced, all of a sudden I could see the strain, and then the next lap they backed off so much. The pace slowed down tremendously, and they looked like they were jogging because they couldn't deal with the discomfort. We're too comfortable in our lives at times. And when we get into running, and running is discomfort, and being okay with that discomfort, we need to be recognizing, yes, this discomfort is going to end when I hit that finish line. And the sooner I do it, the quicker the discomfort ends. All right, moving on. So we talked a little bit about having others to talk to. Having others to talk to is tremendously important for multiple things. You need to be able to express grief. You need to express frustration. You need to express failures. but you also need to be able to express your successes and share your successes, share in your grief, share your frustrations, share your failures. You can't keep them bottled up. It's hard to process if we keep it bottled up. I talk to my wife about, all of these things. Having that person that you feel safe with to talk to about all of these things is vital for us. Again, if we keep it to ourselves, we don't truly process it. We have to let it out. We have to talk about it. We have to let emotions come with it. And whatever those emotions are, we have to let them out. That's really hard. If it's crying, it's crying. You've heard me cry on this podcast. I'm probably one of the more open people that you'll hear on a podcast. And, that's because I want to be honest and real with you. Emotion is okay. Being vulnerable is okay. Allow yourself that grace to express these things and put them out there. Put them out there with those you love and trust. That love and trust will grow deeper because you allowed them into your life, into these intimate moments. So allow yourself to express them and allow those emotions to come out. You'll help process things better and faster. All right. I probably should just end there because that's probably the most powerful one. This last one I probably should have done earlier. I'm almost hesitant to even talk about it because I think that last point is the best one and the most major. So I'm not even going to get into the last one. We could talk about it at some other time. It has to deal with technology, and I don't want to end on that note. So let's just end this piece with saying, please, if you don't have someone to talk to, reach out. There's so many resources. There's so many people. We have a wonderful community. And if you're hurting, this community is here for you. I'm here for you. Please reach out to somebody, especially if you're hurting. We have a lot of people in this world that are stressed and upset, depressed, and we don't oftentimes talk to others. But we're here for you. I'm here for you. So please reach out to us. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening. Give yourself grace. Please, if you have thoughts, anything that you can think of that you want to reach out about and talk to me, that's great. As I said, I'm here for that as well. As always, if you're looking for coaching and I can, facilitate that conversation, let's reach out and touch base. My show notes have all the ways to reach out to me. And I'm happy to have that conversation and discuss coaching with you and what that would look like. Really appreciate that opportunity. So thank you. And thanks to those that have. Next week is the Fierce Dragon, and we've got a lot of thoughts on it, and I think I'll save those for next week's episode leading into Fierce Dragon. So we'll touch base next week on everything. Again, thank you guys for being a part of this podcast, for listening. Until next time, my friends, keep moving forward. Running is life.